family. We are starting up the Psalm 40 Project interviews again, and we're going to be interviewing a few people who've been around LaGrave or have experience with faith. And today I'm meeting with Jim Boelkins. Jim, let's start with where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up right here in Grand Rapids. I was born in 1944, right in the middle of the war when my dad was overseas. I was the youngest of three boys.
Okay.
In my early days, we lived with my grandmother at 739 Prospect Street. Wow. And we went to LaGrave. I went to Oakdale Christian School, Grand Rapids Christian High School, and then went on from there to that other college that we all know about. There's always hope.
There's always hope.
So I want my Calvin friends to know that too. So it was an interesting time growing up, particularly in the early years that I don't remember, but my dad was gone for 16 months before he came home.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So you grew up at LaGrave, and LaGrave has been here a while. So what is an interesting fact that you can recall about LaGrave that maybe some of us newer members would be interested in, maybe don't know?
Well, in growing up, I grew up in the old church, which a lot of people don't remember at all, but I remember when it was taken down and when this new building was planned. But I think one interesting thing that happened in the old church that I'll tell you that's
okay.
personal is that we were in the old church, and in the old church had no air conditioning. There were some seats up in the front of the church called the deacon seats that were right on the church side by the alley, and there was a door. We liked to sit there because you could get air in the church. And it was a baptism morning, and there was a father there that after the baptism, the baby was screaming, the father was sweating, and my mother got up, went and picked up that baby and headed out of the church. And she started a tradition for years that my mother and a group of other older women would carry the babies out after baptism so the parents could stay and enjoy the service. And to this day, I have people come to me and tell me how they were carried out by my mother after baptism. So it was a different time in the church, and I think it was a wonderful tradition.
Just an example of the church organically caring for each other.
The church cared, and
yeah.
I think that's an endemic character of LaGrave Church and how they care for each other.
I think that's
so
right.
There are a lot of other interesting things that I could share, but we'll go on.
We'll stay with that for now. Yeah. So think about what are some of the ways that the people in this church, that this congregation positively impacted your own faith development?
Well, certainly growing up in the church, Reverend Eppiga was a pastor.
Okay.
He taught our Heidelberg Catechism class, and there were so many wonderful role models in the church that I played with on our church softball team. But I think one of the interesting areas for me was a group called the Sunday Nighters, which was our youth group in those days. And we did meet on Sunday evening. It's interesting that our adult sponsors for our group were Rich and Helen DeVos and Jay and Betty Van Andel. And I learned a lot from Rich DeVos in those early days. But the Sunday Nighters was a very active group. We had kids come from all different churches around Grand Rapids. We had the most active group going.
Okay.
We had marvelous retreats that we went on, out to Camp Manitoulin on Barlow Lake. Very inspiring activities. I think something else that we did that was unique is that we had square dances.
Oh, wow.
And that was not viewed positively by a number of churches in Grand Rapids. And my father was chair of the education committee, and he got some interesting letters from these churches about where we were doomed to go because of square dancing.
Yeah.
But those activities really influenced me and my faith. Certainly the worship time. We went to church. I mean, going to church twice on Sunday was just part of our family tradition in the church.
Right.
And I probably was absorbing more than I even realized in my youth, but realize it now in my later years.
Yeah.
And I think the other aspect of things of growing up in the church is we lived out of state for 34 years after college.
Okay.
Went to a lot of different churches, rubbed shoulders with people in different settings, in small group settings, individual Bible study activities. A good friend of mine, we did walk through the Bible together for a year. And I think those relationships really helped nurture my own faith as I was growing up. And then now coming back to LaGrave, the impact of the preaching with Stan Mast and Peter and Ruth, Christy, all of you, yourself, has had, I think, a tremendous nurturing effect on me and in my own faith.
Well, when you talk about LaGrave square dancing, receiving these letters, it reminds me when I first came here, I was preaching a chapel service at Holland Home. I think it was at Fulton Manor, and they invited me to stay for coffee afterwards. And one of the residents at Holland Home said, "You're from LaGrave? Oh, that's that progressive church." So maybe she was thinking back in the day. But I think LaGrave has found a way to both continue trying new things and doing new things that maybe feel progressive, but keeping Christ as the center of all that we do. So,
certainly.
Yeah.
No question.
Exactly. So, okay, so church, I love hearing how church was so formative in your life. Are there other experiences outside of church, I don't know how else to say it, that have also been formative in your life?
I look at those, sometimes certain events and different activities help nurtured my own faith. And I would say that one of the times, very young, in graduate school, getting married, having children, it was the Vietnam War time. I was classified 1A coming right out of college. I have a letter that the Marines really wanted me, but I got into college. I got a 2S deferment, went through graduate school. But during that time, in raising a family, jobs were not very available at that time in my discipline. I was trained in physiology and pharmacology. And so there was a lot of stress. And I think that stress, no money, and the stress of that really forces you to your knees in many cases in events like that. And it did, and I think helped strengthen our faith as a family. And certainly Barb was a key part of that. I think another thing that really influenced my own faith and nurturing was in the work that I did. I was in the sciences, and you take histology and anatomy and physiology, and the more you studied the human body, you realize only a creator God could do this. And everything works in the system. It's just incredible. And I was always struck by how few of my colleagues in medicine did not recognize God as the creator. I don't know how you could miss it. And so that was formative to me. Another aspect of events that influenced me was when you teach is when you really learn. And at a time I taught, I loved Nehemiah. Nehemiah was sort of my hero for leadership development. And I taught a course on the book of Nehemiah twice, very comprehensive book. And I learned a tremendous amount from Nehemiah about the importance of prayer, of planning, of structure, of leadership, of working side by side with people, dealing with opposition when it comes. That had a real influence on nurturing my own faith. And then I would say a last event that was really had an influence on both Barb and me was the process of adoption that we did fairly late. Matt was going off to college, John was in high school, and we adopted a high-risk infant. And that's been 33 years of tremendous struggles and challenges. And unless we could trust God that in all of this, we often said, okay, God, why? We didn't expect all of this that we've dealt with, but out of it, we've also gathered tremendous blessings, particularly through this church. And the way people have come around us in recent years during difficult times. And all of those things strengthen you from the standpoint of having to trust God things. So when you're in leadership positions, you want to be a fixer of everything. And you realize there are some things you just can't fix. And so you have to trust that God will take care of it. And so that's had a real influence on our faith development for me personally.